So I've been having a problem with my Dakota where my battery isn't charging properly. You'd start the truck and the voltmeter in the dash would say it'd be about 14 volts. But after about a minute, it would start falling down and eventually it would settle around 12.6 to 12.8 volts, which is way too low. And it'd go even lower when I turn my headlights on. And I've been fighting this problem for a few months now, trying to figure out why it's happening. So I've gone through all the normal things where changed the alternator, and the alternator was bad. It was leaking oil everywhere from the bearings. And I changed that and there's no difference. So the next thing I did is I started looking at this plastic thing back here. And I had thought it was a regulator, but it isn't. It's just a molded piece of plastic to make sure you get the wires in the right place. Well, these wires are broken off at the end of the housing right here. So what I did is you can't see it too well, but you can see I kind of shaved that plastic off and pulled the wires out. And then I ran 2 new wires in the wiring harness instead of doing the easy way and just sticking it directly. But it goes all the way down here. And these 3 vacuum actuators tie into the green, which is ground. The blue goes to the PCM, which is right here. It goes all the way around under here. And then it goes to this connector right here. And you can see I pulled them out and redid the wires. And that didn't help. So the next thing I did was I did some research because the O'Reilly and AutoZone guy said it was a bad voltage regulator. Well, I looked and looked and looked. Everywhere I could look, there was no voltage regulator. And then I found this one post several years old that said it was inside the PCM. And indeed it is, and I will show you because I have my old PCM here that I didn't give back as a core charge just to see what the hell was inside of it. So, here is what the PCM looks like when you take the lid off. And this board, if it'll focus, there we go. This board comes out, and this board right here is what the voltage regulator is. Under there is the control, and that works for the fuel injection. But this right here is potted and silicone, at least mine was. So I started depotting it because there's a lot of cracks in there. And it looks like some of the components were bad, and they were. Those capacitors there, that capacitor were bad. This transistor right here, which is, let me find it. This is the original Mopar one. See if it'll focus. There we go. This one was bad. Anyway, I measured it between the pins, the gate drain and source. All of them said that this thing was shorted. And the only thing I could cross-reference it is a 2N 3055, and I happen to have one of those. But getting this thing out was a royal pain because they actually soldered the heads of the screws that hold it down to the board. So I had to spend about an hour getting those out. And as usual with old stuff, it ripped some traces off the board, so I had to do some trace repair. Well, I put this board back in with the new PCM. So the new PCM was in, and I just used this connector right here. And this one actually started working a little bit better. But again, after about a minute, the voltage would start dropping. So it confused me, and I thought the new PCM was bad. So I got another PCM, and it was the same story. So, frustrated, I started pulling the positive. You can see where my finger is. That's where the positive voltage comes out of the alternator. And it goes around, again, following these green and blue wires, but it goes to a different connector down here. This just little single one. And I started pulling it out of the harness to figure out where it went. And it doesn't actually go to the PCM. It goes all the way around this big loom over the brake booster. And then it goes to this connector, which goes through the firewall. It doesn't actually go to the battery, which I thought it would. And it goes into here under the driver's floorboard. Let's see. And right there is where it comes through, and here's the other half of the connector right here. So I traced this, and at first I thought it was going into this fuse and relay box, but it doesn't. The wires went all the way up there onto the top of the steering column. And it would be sitting right about here, and there's a bar that goes from the ignition switch. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I think it's, excuse the shaky cam, yeah, it's right here, this little bar, and that actuates a relay, and that's where all those wires go. So after much pain, I got that relay out and took it apart, and here's what it looks like on the inside. It's green and corroded, and it has some severe wear on the contacts. And you can see how beefy these contacts are. You'd think it's for switching an alternator to a battery, and that's exactly what it is. But no one seems to know what it is, and this is the only part number on the whole thing. It's a Mopar TMP 268. So, now my journey continues, and I'm going to have to figure out where the heck this thing goes. But a lot of people don't go this far in trying to troubleshoot this thing, and they'll go down to O'Reilly's and you'll see something like this, an external voltage regulator. So these were common on Mopars from, I don't know, the 70s up until maybe 1980, 1981, maybe a few later cars. But you don't want to use one of these, because if you bypass the PCM voltage regulator, you're going to have all sorts of problems. Check engine lights, maybe the vehicle will start acting funny. But I was told by an old Mopar guy that, yeah, these regulators right here, you don't want to use one on a later 80s vehicle. So I'm not going to. I'm going to do the right way and fix this. So I'm going to have to figure out what this thing is. Again, it looks like a giant just relay that's actuated by the ignition. And if I can't find one, I'll probably have to end up rebuilding it, which isn't going to be very easy. Let me get some more light in here, because you can see that there's some severe wear right here. I mean, I can feel that with my finger. It's like a giant groove. There's some here, some there. And I mean, it wouldn't be impossible to make these, but it would be a giant pain. So I thought I'd share that with everyone who's having trouble with older Dodge Dakotas, the first generation. And the first generation was from 1987 to either 1989 or 1990. And I think in 91 is when they came out with the Magnum V6 and V8. And that's when everything changed. And you can get parts for those all day long. But the first gen Dakotas, I mean, you'll have hell finding anything. Like, I had a intake manifold, which is, I can't find it right now, but an intake manifold took me about 2 years to find one, because the 239 V6 that they made for it, they only made for 3 or 4 years before they switched to the Magnum. So while it shares a lot of common parts with an LA 318, you're gonna have problems finding the bigger parts for it, like the intake manifold. So that's it. I thought I'd just share with you my struggles, and hopefully that helps you with your struggles if you have a truck of this vintage.